On the streets of Honiara, heavy security. Inside Parliament, fierce debate.
A vote delayed is a vote denied.
This, sir, sets a bad precedent, and bad decisions come from bad intentions.
Mannaseh Sogavare says next year's poll will clash with the Pacific Games, but he's furiously rejected an Australian government offer to help fund the elections in 2023, so they don't have to be pushed back.
The announcement by the Australian Foreign Affairs Minister is seen by the government of Solomon Islands as an attempt to directly interfere, Mr. Speaker, into our domestic affairs.
Still, he's happy to take the money so long as it's on his terms and the election is held when he wants it. Civil society and analysts are worried Mr. Sogavare is tearing at the democratic fabric of Solomon Islands.
We are undermining, and it's not gonna, we're setting a very, very bad precedent for the future of this country.
The opposition warning it could even stoke fresh social unrest in the capital.
I believe that the Pacific Game is just an excuse for the extension. I think the government is using this as an excuse just to stay longer in the parliament.
Australia might be worried about the trajectory of Solomon Islands, but the federal government has few good options. Ignoring the problem won't make it go away, but pushing too hard could have consequences as well, particularly as China builds up its influence in the country. Stephen Jedgetts, ABC News, Canberra.
Reuters correspondent Kirsty Needham says the bill was rushed through by Prime Minister Mannaseh Sogavare despite objections from the opposition and public.
Solomon Islands has a 4-year election cycle, and probably for about a year now there has been rumours and concern that the Prime Minister Sogavare would seek to delay the election. He had been saying that the Solomon Islands are hosting the Pacific Island Games next year. These are the big regional athletics competition for which China is constructing around 7 stadiums and venues. And so he had been putting out this argument that both the general election that was due next year and the games could not be held at the same time. There had been some consultation and the feedback. The opposition had said that there is a lot of opposition to this in the community, that churches and business groups don't see any reason to change the constitution and delay that election cycle to host a games. But it happened today. On Thursday, first, second and third reading were rushed through. A process for committee scrutiny of the bill was bypassed, and the constitution was amended so that in May 2023, when Parliament is due to dissolve, that will now be delayed by 7 months to the end of the year. But an election, we heard today, an election isn't expected until April 2024.
So now that the elections are delayed, as you say, is there any way that the opposition is looking to reverse that move?
I don't think that there is any way that they can. So the vote was 37-10, and that really reflects the support that Sogavare has in this parliament. Of course, that support is assisted by funding that's provided by the Chinese government to the Prime Minister's Fund, which we recently heard in parliamentary committee hearings has been regularly distributed by Sogavare to 39 of those politicians. So there really was no surprise that this legislation got through today. But there's a lot of tension. There had been concern by the Business Council, put out a statement today urging calm. They didn't want to see a repeat of riots that in November saw a lot of businesses in central Honiara burnt down. The police were highly visible on the streets today. So there is, concern that there could be a backlash to the constitution being changed and the, elections being delayed.
And of course, critics are saying that this all has to do with Prime Minister Sogavare making the most of having an election after what might be a crowning glory in his leadership, assuming that it's a successful Pacific Games with brand new facilities and stadiums, as you mentioned, built by China. How would the Solomons public view this? Do they view this as a power grab?
Well, the opposition certainly labelled it a power grab today. And, as for the reasons why, I guess politically, it would be very attractive to go to an election after a successful regional event where you had lots of people enjoying sport, you had, lots of congratulation of the sporting event. But it's not usual to change an election cycle for that. Barry's put up a series of reasons as to why holding the Pacific Games means an election had to be delayed. Initially, he had said it's because of money, that the Solomon Islands couldn't afford to host both the Games and run an election. Now, earlier this week, Penny Wong, the Australian Foreign Affairs Minister, revealed through the media that Australia had in fact offered to fund the election, as it has done in the past and as it did recently for Papua New Guinea. This angered Sogavare. He accused Australia of, foreign interference, that they shouldn't have been, revealing this publicly as the election delay bill was before Parliament. But with that excuse now gone, there was a series of other reasons that he laid out to Parliament today. One is the logistics, putting funding aside, because Australia had offered to fund it, that you couldn't have the Games and an election in the same year. He also said that you couldn't have political instability leading up to the Games, so that's another reason not to have an election. He said the economy needed to be on a sound footing. So there was a whole series of other reasons where he was outlining why I guess it would suit the sitting government, the government that we have now, for there not to be a vote and perhaps other members of Parliament's returned.
Given what Prime Minister Sogavare said about Australia in Parliament today, would that actually cause more anxiety in Canberra with the Albanese government against the backdrop of Chinese influence in the Pacific?
So Australia's been really cautious in what it has said. Sogavare today perhaps, may have been goading Australia, said, sure, you've offered to fund this. Well, once this bill's through Parliament, please show us the money. He didn't say exactly that, but, DFAT and Penny Wong have been really careful about what they say. They've said, all along that this dispute was a domestic political dispute over the bill, that Australia didn't want to be seen to be interfering in politics. And the reason they are careful about that is that Australia and the United States and other Western allies are, pushing a pro-democracy message across the Pacific, and they want to uphold the Constitution, the parliamentary democracy traditions of places like the Solomon Islands, when you have another big player arriving in the form of China that has a very different political system, that doesn't have elections, and is now seeking to strike security pacts as it has in the Solomon Islands. And that is probably where the concern is from Australia, that if there is unrest this time, after this big change to the political cycle, that it would be Chinese police that are called out.
So, Kirsty, would that be a test, I suppose, of the security deal between Beijing and Honiara, in that we might see Chinese police getting involved?
Absolutely, because the reason for the security pact, from what Sogavare has said and from what China said, was those rights in November, that they wanted the right to send in Chinese police to protect Chinese infrastructure and buildings. So if we did see unrest, that is very likely a reason for Sogavare to be calling in Chinese police.
Kirsty, really good to get your insights once again. Thanks very much.
Thanks for your time.